Have you ever seen a plow? It's a tool that most farmers use to break and loosen the soil in their fields before they're going to put the seeds in it. They'll say that this is the best way to cultivate the soil. But today, I'm going to tell you why this might not be the case. I'm going to explain the principles behind no-till farming. No-till farming? What on earth is that, you might think? That sounds complicated. And yes, this explanation might be a little difficult to understand, but I'm pretty sure you'll know much more once we're done. I hope so, at least. But let's get started. Let's go to the field, to the soil. Here's a pea plant nicely rooted in the soil. The pea plant is part of the plant group that we call legumes. This means that it has some kind of superpower. Or more specific, it has a friend with a superpower. This friend is called Rhizobium. He's a bacterium and he lives in the roots of our pea plant. His special power is that he can take nitrogen from the atmosphere, from the air, and put it into these small knots in the root where he lives with his family. Nitrogen is a nutrient that all living things need in order to grow. This means that Rhizobium will give nitrogen to our pea plant, which will then grow more. In return, the pea plant will give energy to Rhizobium. This is what we call a symbiosis, a biological interaction between two organisms or more. Or in this case, we could also call it a win-win situation. As farmers, we are big fans of Rhizobium and his family. Now, our pea plant has grown into maturity, and we will therefore harvest it. As you can see, much of the plant is being left in the field on the soil. This we call organic matter. The organic matter will over time decompose, and the nutrients, the building blocks that the plant is made of, will be broken down into the very smallest form in which they exist, and then released in a form that new plants can absorb and use to grow. This is a process we call mineralization. We will look closer at this process a little bit later, but first we will look at the organisms who do this job of mineralization, the working men, so to speak. A lot of different organisms are living in the soil, but in general, we can put them into 4 different categories: bacteria, fungi, arthropods, and earthworms. Each category plays a distinct role in the process of decomposition of the organic matter. The bacteria will break down the organic matter with the use of a substance called an enzyme. The enzyme works as a scissor, cutting down the organic material into very small parts that the new plants can then use to grow. Parts to build their organism out of. The bacteria can only work from the outside and inwards. The fungi also break down the matter with the use of enzymes. But unlike the bacteria, the fungi can penetrate the pieces of organic matter and do the breakdown from the inside and out. The arthropods are actually not very good at breaking down the organic matter because they do not have the right enzymes. But when they, for instance, eat some of the plant root, they will poop out the root in smaller parts. Thereby, the surface area for the microorganisms to work on is greater. So, the arthropods actually do not live off the plant parts, but off the microorganisms. The earthworms will also eat the material, breaking it into smaller parts and thereby increasing the surface area. Furthermore, they will pull the material into the soil. Here we get more moist, and this will speed up the decomposition process because the conditions for the microorganisms have become better. Okay, so far so good. That was the easy part. The next part is a little bit more difficult. This is a process called mineralization. As mentioned earlier, mineralization is a process in which the nutrients in the chemical compounds in organic matter are released in inorganic forms that the plant can absorb. In some ways, you can say that it's just like when you're eating meat. You cannot just kill the cow and start eating it. Before eating, you need to cut it into smaller pieces and maybe even chemically alter it by cooking it. A plant cannot just eat the building blocks of the dead plants near it. But luckily, the organisms mentioned before will swoop in and help. Now, let's look a little bit closer at the building blocks and how they flow around in cycles throughout nature. We will look at the building block called carbon and the building block called nitrogen. Carbon is the 6th element in the periodic table. Maybe you have heard of it. It is a great part of all living things and is part of molecules such as glucose, DNA, and amino acids. It goes around in a cycle called the carbon cycle, where it gets recycled from one form to another. As you might have heard, there is something called carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, which our plants use to grow through a process called photosynthesis. In this process, plants will transform carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen. The opposite process of photosynthesis is called respiration, which is what us humans do. Our body will make energy out of sugar molecules and oxygen, and then it will release carbon dioxide and water. The carbon dioxide can also be absorbed by the ocean. Here it will be part of the plant and animal life, or it will fall to the bottom of the ocean, being fossilized. When we then burn it off, as fuel for instance, the carbon will be released into the atmosphere again as carbon dioxide. The plant can then fixate the carbon dioxide once again and use this to grow. When the plant dies and decomposes, the microorganisms will do the mineralization, and during this process, they release the carbon as carbon dioxide through respiration. The carbon is the energy source for the microorganisms. Okay, now to the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is the seventh element in the periodic table. This element is also found in abundance in living things, and is also part of molecules such as DNA and amino acids. The nitrogen is a nutrient source for the microorganisms. Nitrogen is also present in our atmosphere. In fact, 78% of the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen in the form called molecular nitrogen. But our plants cannot use this form of nitrogen. But let's not forget our friend Rhizobium. As mentioned before, his type of bacterium can fixate the molecular nitrogen from the air and turn it into the molecule ammonia or ammonium, which the plant can then utilize to grow. But in the soil, some other bacteria are also present, and they will convert the ammonia into a molecule called nitrate, if there is oxygen. This conversion process, called nitrification, includes two steps. First, the bacteria will convert the ammonia into nitrogen dioxide, and after that, some other bacteria will convert the nitrogen dioxide into nitrate. The plants can also use nitrate to grow. If there is no oxygen present in the soil, different kinds of bacteria will thrive. These bacteria will perform a process called denitrification. In this process, the nitrate is being turned into molecular nitrogen again, which will then go up into the atmosphere. When a plant or an animal die and they are decomposed, the nitrogen will, through the mineralization process, be released as inorganic compounds that the plants can absorb through their roots. Animals and humans can then obtain the nitrogen by eating these plants or by eating other animals. In the process of mineralization, the ratio of carbon in relation to nitrogen plays a big role in the speed of the decomposition. If there's too much carbon in the soil, the microorganisms will have a lot of energy, but not enough building blocks to grow in number. The mineralization process will therefore slow down. If there's too much nitrogen in the soil, the microorganisms will have enough building blocks, but not enough energy to grow in number, and therefore they cannot hold the nutrients. The result would be that in case of heavy rains, for instance, the nutrients will wash away because the nutrients are not stuck to anything. This loss of nutrients we also call leaching. Not all dead plant material will be broken down into the very small parts instantly. The decomposition process is an ongoing process, and some will take longer time to decompose than others, depending on the carbon-nitrogen ratio. When you cannot longer define the origin of the organic matter, it is humus. Humus has the right living conditions for microorganisms, and even though plants cannot use the nutrients in the humus particles, the humus has a lot of other great capabilities which will improve the quality of the soil. First of all, humus is good at retaining water, thereby increasing the soil's water retention capacity. On lighter soils, the humus will bind the sand particles together and enhance the capillary effect. The humus will also lighten up a heavy soil, adding to both the drainage and the air exchange capacity. The humus particles have a negative charge, just like the clay particles, and will therefore hold on to positively charged nutrients such as ammonium and potassium. As mentioned before, humus is a great habitat for microorganisms, and therefore it will enhance the mineralization process going on in the soil. A soil with a good amount of humus will also be easier for the plant roots to penetrate. Okay, so now I've talked about a lot of different things regarding the life in the soil. But how does all this connect to the no-till farming I talked about in the beginning? Well, to put it simply, if you don't disturb the life in the soil, the living things down there will take care of all the natural processes that are so crucial for us as farmers. The processes allowing us to grow nutritious food. Being a little bit more specific, this year's crop will use the root channels of the previous year's crop to expand its root net, and this net of root channels will then gradually, year after year, be expanding, allowing the plants to access the nutrients in the deeper layers of the soil. If you don't till, you will not rip apart the strings of fungi either, allowing this web to grow larger and larger too. This could, for instance, be the mycorrhiza fungi, which will then collect loads of nutrients and share it with your crop, enhancing the strength of your plants and in the end, increasing your yield. How about that, huh?